Welcome, everyone. Hello, good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on which time zone you're signing in from today. We are so excited that you are joining us today as we discuss application essays. We're so glad that you're here. I'm Nikki Barron. I'm an Associate Dean of Admission here at Hamilton. I'm also a Hamilton College alum. I graduated from Hamilton in 2002, and I have been reading college essays since I graduated from college. So I've been reading essays for about 19 years or so, but I'm going to pass it over to my colleague JD to introduce himself.
So hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm JD Ross, also an Associate Dean of Admission here at Hamilton, and I have been working in higher education for just about ready to celebrate my 15th anniversary in higher ed. And I will pass it along to Anna.
Hello, and welcome. My name is Anna Wise. I'm one of the Associate Deans of Admission here at Hamilton. I'm also the Director of International Recruitment. I've been reading college essays for about a decade now, so I'm really glad to be here with my colleagues and with you all. I'm excited to talk about college essays.
Great, terrific. So these are the three people that you're able to see on your screen right now, but I also wanted to introduce you to one of our colleagues who's behind the scenes today. Jack Nivison is a Senior Assistant Dean of Admission. He is monitoring the Q&A and the chat for us this evening. So if you have any questions, you are welcome to put those in the Q&A. Jack can either respond to them or he can pass them along to us, and we will be glad to respond to them live. But again, welcome to everyone. We are so excited that you are here and that you are thinking about the essay experience. For those of you who are currently seniors in high school, maybe you've already started thinking about your essay. Maybe you're already partway through a draft of an essay. Maybe you haven't started it at all. And for those of you who might be high school juniors or maybe transfer applicants, you might be just beginning to think about your essay. And I think it's great that you're getting a jump start on it, but we're so glad that you're here. So the purpose of this evening is that we are really going to offer some advice, some tips. We'll answer some common questions about the college essays, but our advice this evening is really just our advice. This is coming from us at Hamilton with the three of us. We're not able to speak about other colleges or on their behalf of how the essay process works in those admission offices, nor are we able to speak on behalf of our other colleagues. So Anna, JD, and I are really going to just be sharing our advice and our tips, but just know that reading essays and this whole process is pretty subjective. So our advice is simply that, just our advice. There are no right ways to craft an essay. There's no clear equation, there's no clear solution on how to write the right essay. So we're just going to give you some ideas to help you brainstorm some ideas, topics, some things that work, some things maybe to think about avoiding as you're working on your own college application essays. But we know that all of you out there today have a great essay in you. We read them and we really enjoy getting to know you through your writing, through your essays, and hearing more about your stories. So today we're going to start by talking a little bit about the essay and how it fits into the application. So what are we looking for as we're reading an application essay? We're then going to move into talking about how to choose some potential topics that you might like to highlight, some things that you might like to write about and address in your essay, and some tips on how you might think about making your essay stand out, making it be memorable for us on the admission committee. We'll give you a couple of examples specifically of memorable essays that the three of us have read over the years. We'll also give you some ideas of some things to remember to do and also some things to remember perhaps not to do or to try to avoid in writing your essay. And then we'll also try to leave time toward the end for any questions that you might have. Again, Jack Nivison is behind the scenes. He's answering questions in the Q&A, but he's also going to forward some of your questions to us to be able to answer live. So just to get started, how does the essay fit into the overall application? How do we use the essay in our process? So when we talk about the application essay, we're talking about that main essay statement, that personal statement that you're writing as part of your application. You'll be writing a main college essay for your common application, or if you're using the coalition application, or if you're using the QuestBridge application. So this is that main personal statement. You'll see that there will be several essay prompts. There'll be several questions and some ideas to get you thinking about how to respond to those questions. Those essay prompts are pretty open-ended for a reason, because we really give you a lot of flexibility where you can really talk about anything that's important to you that you want to highlight and talk about your experience and how it has shaped you. So they're open-ended because we want to see what directions you take those prompts in and what directions you take those questions as you are addressing your essay and telling your story and talking about yourself. So really the essay is your story. It's a chance for you to address directly to the admission committee and highlight those experiences that have shaped you as an individual. We're not mind readers, so if you want us to know something about you, you're going to have to tell us. But just remember that we can't wait to learn more about you. The essay is your chance to have your voice come through in your essay. It's one of the few opportunities in your application when we hear directly from you as the applicant, and we get to hear your voice, we hear your story, and we hear things that are important to you. Remember that you can also use the additional information section of the application, the common application, the coalition application, or the QuestBridge application to address other issues, other topics, other challenges, other facts about yourself that you're not able to fit into your application essay. So we're going to get a little bit more into detail in what to highlight in an essay, but if there are things that you're not covering in your essay that you want to bring to the attention of the admission committee, feel free to put those directly in the additional information section of the application. We also know that all of us have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic these days. Many of us have faced challenges. And if you are interested in highlighting some of those challenges that have directly affected you personally, there is actually a section in the application that is the COVID-19 section of the application where you can address any of those specific challenges or any of those specific experiences that you've had over this year and a half that we've all been coping with the COVID-19 pandemic. If there is information that you would like the admission committee at a particular college or university to know directly about you, you're welcome to send that specific information to those colleges and universities by their email addresses. So sometimes students want some specific information about their interest in a college or something that's directly about their engagement with a college to be considered as part of their application file. You can actually email that directly to each college. Remember that that the application essay that you send through the common application, the coalition application, or the QuestBridge application is going to go to all the colleges that you're applying to. So any college specific information that you would like colleges to know about should really be addressed individually by a separate email to all those colleges that you're applying to. Remember that context matters. This is one piece of the entire student's application file. So whenever we're making admission decisions, the application essay is one piece of many that we consider. In fact, as we're reading applications, we can never zero in on one single part of your application and make a decision just based on that. We're looking at how all the pieces of your application fit together and how you present yourself in your application file. So the application essay is just one piece of many that we consider as we make admission decisions on each application that we review. This is definitely a human process. You're meeting Anna, JD, and I today. The three of us read applications, as well as Jack, who's behind the scenes, as well as some of our other colleagues in the admission office. So this really is a human process. There is a human being who is the reader of your application essay, and we're truly excited about getting to know you and getting to know your story through your application essay. And I'm going to pass it over to Anna now, and Anna's going to talk specifically about what we look for in an application essay.
So this idea, thank you, Nikki, of what do we look for in an application essay? The honest thing is whenever you're talking about multiple human beings, that answer is going to vary somewhat, right? So if you apply to Hamilton, of course, there will be multiple people who will read your application, admission officers, throughout the process. And if you ask each of them what they're looking for, they'll probably give you slightly differing responses. So sometimes I encourage students not to think necessarily what we're looking for, but to realize to themselves that this is an opportunity for them to speak to us directly from their voice. So, for instance, if you're trying to anticipate what all of the Hamilton admission officers would be looking for, you also have to think about any other colleges that you may be applying to. What are they looking for? And before you know it, you're trying to anticipate 40 or 50 different human beings, what they want to look for. It's a hard thing to do. So instead, I encourage students to really think about this is your chance to bring your application to life. As Nikki mentioned, we are going to consider multiple aspects of your application as we're trying to get to know you as potentially a potential member of our community here at Hamilton, and also, of course, as a student and scholar. So we are always looking for multiple aspects, but the essay is a really unique opportunity for you to speak to us directly and let us know a little bit about your personality through the essay. So with that said, we all have read thousands and thousands of college application essays from all around the world, and we can assure you that we are pretty familiar with the type of phraseology, language, and structure that 17 to 20-year-olds tend to use when they're writing essays. So one of the things I would say we do not look for is for students to use very large words, right? I don't know anybody who uses the word plethora or myriad in day-to-day use. So I would encourage you very much to feel like sometimes I also use the line, which is when we're considering applications, we're not really thinking about Pulitzer Prize winning type topics. It doesn't have to use huge words and really innovative structures. Just try and think realistically, what is it that's going to reflect something about your personality and help us get to know you a little bit better through your voice. This also, of course, means we can tell if you have an adult or somebody who's trying to help you edit your essay, if it's been overly edited and it no longer sounds like you. So I sometimes encourage students to think about reading their application essay aloud, right? So if you read your essay aloud, it should use phrasing and structure and language that you would potentially use when you're speaking. And again, probably not plethora. But with that said, it's also notable, while we're not giving out Pulitzer Prizes, you should definitely try and think about proper grammar, structuring, and content of your essay. So that's not to say if you have one too many or too few commas, that's going to be a major issue for us, but we do use the essay as kind of a foundational understanding of your ability to communicate and to write effectively. So while you need to make sure that you're making something that's roughly grammatically accurate and following the prompts in the right length, it's also important to consider that idea of tone and voice. But of course, all of that's easy to say, but how do you focus on an actual topic? I'm hoping JD can give us a little bit of insight into focusing on an actual topic. How to do that, JD?
Sure, Anna. So first of all, if you think about what colleges call this essay, most of us call it the personal essay, right? What's the important word in that phrase? Personal. This is a really good way for you to share something about yourself, something that's unique to you, and something that may not necessarily surface itself somewhere else in your application. I think that whenever you write, you need to consider the audience that you're writing to. As much as you see us up here on the screen right now, maybe you've had a chance to meet admission officers at Hamilton or other colleges when you visit or go on tours. We are kind of strangers too, in a way. So, right, think about oversharing, and maybe the essay is not the place to overshare, but an appropriate level of personal information, right? And that's different for everyone. But again, just remember, oversharing, this may not be the place to do it in your college essay. I think, as Anna mentioned, topics, right? I think topics are really a source of stress for students. And I think one thing you shouldn't do is wait until the last minute, right? I know that high school students are a notoriously procrastinating bunch. I know I certainly was for a bit in high school too. The three of us actually talked about some of our college essays for when we wrote them way back when. But you know what? Most everybody walks around with a notebook or a phone these days that has a nice notes app on it. If you've got a spark of an idea, write it down, right? It doesn't have to be a fully formed thought. It might just be, it might just be an idea or a topic or something that happened in your life that you said, oh, this could be interesting. Maybe this will make a good topic for my essay. Write it down, jot it down, come back to it later when you have time to think about it. Really, the hardest time to think creatively and dive into that topic is when you're on a deadline, right? When you sit down to write that essay. That's not when you're necessarily going to be at your creative best. So give yourself some time to think about that topic and kind of some freedom to let your mind run a little bit. Again, keep a list of those moments that interest you, because if it interests you, chances are it might make an interesting topic for an essay and interest us too. So how can you improve your craft of writing? What makes you a better writer during this process? A lot of times that's just being a better reader. It's reading, right? Exposing yourself to different different methods of writing. We have on our website some essays that worked, right? And we collected them going back 3 or 4 different admission cycles. And you can go on our website, look for college essay tips or essays that worked, and you'll see some good examples there. Now, again, these are just meant for you to review, get familiar with the structure and language used, and think about your own personal topics in the context of reading others' writing. I think it's a really kind of a good exercise to get your mind thinking about this. So we're often asked by high school students, are there any, really great topics, or are there any really, topics that I should avoid? And I think that we don't necessarily need to talk in absolutes here. I think that a really good topic could make for a poor essay if it's not done well, right? Likewise, a topic that you might think is poor, written well and explained well, could turn out great. But I think that you should remember you only have, about 650 words in the Common App for the essay. So you're limited. And so one topic that almost always surfaces every year, and I think we've even seen a little bit more this past year, I think, Anna and Nikki, if you agree with me, is the topic of adversity, right? Nikki mentioned earlier, right? COVID-19, has impacted a lot of people in many different ways. And we certainly see that and have seen it come through in the essays. So adversity certainly is a topic that we all read and are familiar with in student essays. And you can certainly write about this if it's something that's important to you. But a lot of times, right, a deeply adverse topic does require a lot of background and buildup. And again, remember that you only have those 650 or so words that you are working with. And I think before I send this back to Nikki, I'll just give, again, an example of something else that we see a lot, but also where I have read a really good student example of this, and that is change, right? I see a lot of students who write about going to a new high school, or parents moving and they're getting acclimated to a new neighborhood, or a friend in their friend group left, and that was something that was very much a change, a catalyst in their life. We see those topics a lot, and students who can share their personal experience and level on that is really important. I read a lot of essays about other people, right? We have students who like to write about grandparents a lot. Grandparents frequently surface in college essays. And I find at the end of an essay, sometimes I think I know grandpa better than I know the student, right? And we want to kind of flip the lens on that. It's certainly fine to use family, to use these experiences, but make sure that you're telling them through your lens and that it's your side. That is what we are really interested in reading when we go through your essays. So Nikki is going to share with us some tips and tricks around gimmicks in essays.
Sure. So thanks, JD. So I think sometimes when we read an essay that sounds forced, we can tell that a student is trying too hard. So I would recommend that you be yourself, let your authentic voice come through. Don't try to be gimmicky. Don't try to write in a style that you think we want to hear, because what we want to hear is you. We want to hear your personal voice and the things that are important to you. Sometimes students are curious to know about humor, whether humor can be a way to make an essay stand out. Certainly, if you consider yourself to be a funny person, if you have a great sense of humor, let that shine, let that come through in your essay. But I don't think your college essay is the first time to try to be funny. So if you are not funny, it's okay to not have humor be a part of your application essay. Again, your essay should be a reflection of you and your voice and the things that are important to you. So sincerity is important in your writing. Clean and simple writing is better than trying too hard, because we can tell when things have been forced in the language that you use. Another effective method of writing an essay is to have some twists in it. Maybe you're taking your essay in one direction and the reader of your essay thinks we know where you're headed with that topic, but then all of a sudden you spin it in a different way, and it takes a completely unexpected turn. Those can be some really surprising and exciting twists to read in your story, in your essay. Also, I think another way to grab the attention of your reader from the admission committee is to have a good opening. We'll get into a couple of examples of good openings in just a minute. But I think that opening sentence, or maybe not just a sentence, but your opening paragraph. This does not have to be a traditional paper that you're writing for an English class. In other words, it does not have to have a thesis statement and the following paragraphs have evidence to back up that thesis statement. It really should be a description of an experience, an interest that you have, a relationship that you have, a goal that you have, something that is a reflection of who you are and provides a lot of personal insight into how you think and showing your voice to the admission committee. I think also sometimes students try to think about sort of who they are, and they try to answer that question, who am I, in their application essay, and it ends up being about multiple topics in one essay. Sometimes those essays then end up just skimming the surface, and students aren't then able to go into much depth into who they are and what the things that are important to them and their personality traits and having their voice come through. I think it is better to talk about one moment or maybe a couple of moments in time rather than to try to span your entire childhood. And so talking about one specific example of one specific experience that you've had generally then will allow you to go in a lot more depth in your writing and really give us a sense of who you are, how you think, and have your voice come through in your writing. So I'm going to turn over to Anna now. Anna's going to give an example of some essays that worked, and specifically that opening sentence. Anna and JD both have an opening sentence that they would like to share with all of you this evening.
Thank you, thank you. So as Nikki said, an opening sentence can be a really great way to draw an admission officer in, to make us feel like we're looking for more information and we're really eager to learn more about you. Now, if you're a little worried and you say, I don't know if I have the world's most exciting, don't worry, we're still going to read your essay, right? So we just want to give you a couple of examples so you can kind of think about ways to really dig in to the types of opportunities that you have for your essay. But we also want to make sure that you realize we're going to read every single one of your essays in their entirety, regardless of if you have the world's most exciting entry sentence. But with that said, I want to share an example of an essay sentence that I really enjoyed. And it is also from I believe it's going to be listed on the website under Essays That Worked, which can be a really great tool for you because it can also help you understand that there are differences and varieties in the essays that worked and the types of students that are admitted to Hamilton and the types of students that are admitted to different types of institutions. But the sentence I want to share with you, I'm going to read it really quickly, so give me just a moment. The sentence says, when I was still small enough to fit in the sun-drenched space between the armoire and the couch, I sat cross-legged and spun the world. So one of the things that I really like about this sentence is not only does it paint a pretty good picture, I understand a lot of things about this essay to begin with, right? So this student is talking about a formative time in their childhood. And as Nikki said, we don't necessarily need to have the entire life experience, but this student has said, there's something that happened when I was so small, I could fit in this narrow spot in my living room that was important, and that's what I'm going to write about. Also, the student is painting a very vivid image of the room around them, but not just painting the image, but also saying how they interacted with it. Because sometimes I'll read an essay and it's very narrative and describes everything that's around the student, but doesn't tell me anything about how the student has interacted with that space. So that's kind of one of the reasons I enjoyed it. I'm going to read it again for you, just so you have it in your mind. So that says, when I was still small enough to fit in the sun-drenched space between the armoire and the couch, I sat cross-legged and spun the world. And that really helps me understand what to expect with this essay, and also helps me picture the student in this space. JD, do you have an example that you'd like to share?
I do, Anna, and like yours, mine also, kind of calls to a specific moment in time that a student has chosen to share rather vividly with us, and also something that kind of leads me into wanting to read the rest of the essay that they've written. So I'll read that one for you here. It's 6:52 a.m. on a frosted over Friday in September, and my dad and I are running late as we wind down our steep hill to school, right? Thinking about that, right? I want to know what happens next in this story, right? It's cold. It's a chilly morning. It's September. Where are they going, right? What's next? Where is this going to lead? It really draws me in and makes me want to follow it along. I'll just read it again real quick here before we move on, so you hear it again. It's 6:52 a.m. on a frosted over Friday in September, and my dad and I are running late as we wind down our steep hill to school. So that's some intros that caught our eyes, but let's also dive a little bit deeper now into some topic examples and things about them that, again, kind of still stick with us. I've got an example here from a couple of years ago where a student wanted to talk about how her athletic pursuits were really integral into the rest of her life, and specifically into kind of her upbringing in her family. She had a lot of brothers. She had parents who were pretty active in athletics as well. And it really, she drew me in there with, kind of one of those openings that, again, still sticks with me to this day. She talked about how when she was a little girl, she had older brothers. Her older brothers would take the couch cushions off of the couch, and they would bungee cord and duct tape them to her, right, to her stomach, to her arms, to her legs, and they would stick her out in the street hockey goal out in the street in the neighborhood, and she was the goalie, right? And I can just, imagine her just bungee cords wrapped around couch cushions, sitting there trying to stop the goal from going in. But it was a great introduction to just how that piece of athletics, and then being that, the girl in a family of boys, it just really stuck with me, and still to this day, it's one I remember pretty vividly. Nikki, I know you've got one that I also think has a family theme to it, if I'm not mistaken.
It does. So one of my favorite essays over the years that I've read, or I would say in general, the essays that are most memorable to me are the ones where the students choose a topic that's somewhat ordinary, that these are sort of everyday occurrences, but it's the depth that students are able to write about these experiences that give so much personal insight into who these students are as people. They are so self-reflective that even though they're somewhat ordinary topics, I really feel like I get to know the student as a person through that writing. And one of those essays that I could still remember was many years ago. I read an essay where a student wrote about her family's tradition, where every night her family would have dinner together. And she wrote about the family dining room table. Now, you would think that nightly family dinners are something that happen every day for the student, and for several students probably in our applicant pool. But the way that the student wrote about this essay gave me so much insight into who she is and her relationships with her family, because she's the youngest of 4 siblings in her family. And she talked about the different conversations that happen around that family dinner table. And when she was really young, she had a hard time carrying the conversation. She didn't feel like she could really contribute to the conversation because she didn't really always understand the topics that her family was talking about. And she talked about how each of her older siblings went off to college. Her relationship at the family dining room table changed every year. And so she was then able, as she matured, she was able to develop a greater sense of what these conversations were all about, and being able to make her own contributions to those family dining room tables. I think it gave me so much insight into who she is. It gave me insight into her relationships with her family. It gave me insight into how she's matured over the years. And I think that's also key to writing an essay. If you're going to talk about something that happened a really long time ago, make sure that you're reflecting on who you are as a person now, because who you are now is then going to be the person that will make a contribution to our campus community. So sometimes students will talk about experiences that happened in elementary school or when they were really young, but they then don't tie it back into how that experience shaped them as a person today and who they are now as a young adult applying to college. Anna, I think you had an example of one of your favorite essays that you wanted to highlight as well.
Absolutely. And I think it has a little bit of similar themes as well. So I while I read domestic applications, I read tons of applications, I also read a lot of international applications, which means oftentimes the essays that I'm reading have to do with cultural context and hopes and dreams and complicated life journeys that sometimes students have gone on. And I remember this past year, there was an essay that I really, really enjoyed, which was written by a girl who had actually been born in the United States and then as a small child had moved back to Central Asia, where her family was from historically. And then she was talking about sometimes some of the challenges that she felt as a person in between two different cultures and trying to recognize and understand where does she fit in this complicated dynamic. But she actually told the essay through the metaphor of cooking with her grandmother, which was something really that I really enjoyed, because we also talk about family connection. We're also foodie fans over here. But she described multiple dishes that she learned to cook with her grandmother. Part of the reason that her family had moved back to this area was because they wanted to be closer and connected to their family, including her grandmother at the time. And so she described really understanding and learning how to cook traditional cuisine, traditional local cuisine, but then also her grandmother reaching out to her and saying, how can we incorporate some of the American cultural cooking strategies within this area, and how can we bring those two together? So it's really a lovely experience, not only of showing kind of as a metaphor for the experience of coming from one culture into another and finding a way to meld the two of them through connections such as family and food, but also gave it very, very viscerally, as we can really picture and see, almost imagine we're in that kitchen along with that grandmother and granddaughter relationship, watching them cook and watching them come up with really interesting, innovative twists on traditional recipes that bring together some of the wonderful aspects of traditional culture as well as US culture as well. So I really enjoyed that essay particularly. And I think that that's kind of an example of a topic that we want to transition into, which is overuse topic. So oftentimes students are concerned and they say, what happens if I write about something that's overused? Now, we talked earlier about people writing about grandparents and things like that. So I want to be clear, when we're talking about overuse topics, that doesn't mean that there's not a place for those types of topics. It really just means you need to be very thoughtful about what you want to do when you are writing these types of areas. Because I think sometimes students spend a lot of time stressing about things they should not be doing, as opposed to thinking about what do they actually want to express and what's important to them. So before I talk about some examples of, say, overused topics, I want to reassure you that your story matters, your story is important, and you have a great essay in you, right? So we're just going to talk about some areas and really encourage you that if you're going to write on topic one, such as one of these, really make sure you're doing so for a very thoughtful reason and you're taking your best opportunity to put your foot forward. But just because I have it listed here doesn't mean your college essay is not a good one. So just want to put that out there. So with that said, first thing is oftentimes students will write about activities that they're involved in. Sometimes it will be like when I was in 9th grade, I started in the soccer team, and then in 10th grade, I added to that debate, and then and sometimes it can come off a little bit like a resume, right? As opposed to an essay. So it is important to realize that if you're writing about your essay, if you're writing about activities, something you've enjoyed, it's not so much that we're interested in what the activity is. We want to know how has that impacted and informed you. So if you're going to write about activities that you've engaged in, make sure you're being thoughtful about it and realizing that the topic of the essay should not be the activity. The topic is you and how have you grown through it. So I would encourage you to think about that before writing an essay just about all of the engagements you've had. How have you grown from this experience? So another thing, which can kind of come back to the idea of the grandma essay, that I gave you an example of what a grandma essay that's really great because it talks about really a metaphor for the student and their identity and their journey through combining two different cultural heritages. But sometimes students will write about people who are very important in their life. And they'll write a really great essay showing an image of maybe a family member who's sick, somebody who's going through a really, really difficult time. But we read this essay and remember, of course, that you have about 650 words, right? So you only have so many words. We'll read this essay and sometimes half or even more than half is really more about the family member who's so important to us, right? Which we want to recognize. We've all been helped along our journey by other people. We all have relationships that are important to us. But your college essay should really be about you and how you're growing. So if you're going to be talking about a relationship with somebody that's important, it's important to make sure that you're connecting it back to you, your growth, and what does this tell us about you as a person, as opposed to spending half or even all of your essay describing some person in your life who's very important to you. Just make sure you're realizing, again, the focus of the essay is you. It's not about the activities. It's not about the other person. So another example can be, Nikki talked about this a little bit earlier on, but sometimes students feel like, I can't narrow down my focus, and I want to tell you about this, and I want to tell you this and this and this and this, and they put 6 different topics in a 650 word place, right? So if you're focusing on your essay, try and make sure that you are really focusing on maybe a smaller moment of time or 1 or 2 aspects, as opposed to trying to make your college essay tell us everything about you as a person. Because if you do that, then your essay can come off as being about multiple topics, and it's a little bit harder for us to really understand you like we could if you really gave us one important example. Realize again that your essay is going to be considered in the context of your overall application. So trust us that we're going to have more information from you from sources such as your letters of recommendation, also from your extracurricular activities. We're going to see all of that information. We may have interviews or other supplements from you as well. So your essay does not have to reflect every part of you as a person, but try and make sure that there's going to be one aspect that helps us get to know you and kind of narrow down your focus, as opposed to choosing multiple essays. And then sometimes we get topics that are, we kind of call them meta essays. And these are like topics that are trying to explain life and the world, how you've come to understand it. They tend to be very big. I personally was a philosophy major, so I enjoy big meta existential questions. I'm a big fan, but your essay is not the place for us to talk about a big life philosophy, really, because again, we start to get distracted by big, grand ideas. What is the meaning of life? When really the essay should be about you, right? We want to get to know you. We keep coming back to that idea. But so I would encourage you to realize, even if you have this great inspiration types of things, your college essay may not be the place for that to live. Realize that oftentimes it's more about expressing who you are and what's important to you. These are kind of some overall pieces of advice, but we're going to transition at this point and talk a little bit about some do's and don'ts, which will hopefully be a very practical type of advice that you can take, things that we really enjoy in essays, and then things that maybe you can think once or twice before taking a certain strategy. Nikki, do you want to kick us off with some do's and don'ts?
So many of these tips we've already addressed, but I'm actually going to share my screen with you all now and share a set of slides here with just some ideas of do's and don'ts here. And again, many of these we've already highlighted, but we just want to really bring it all together as a summary for you in case some of you might be taking some notes today. But do write about your interests. Talk about the things that are important to you. Make these about your experiences. When you are writing about the things that you genuinely care about, your enthusiasm and your passion for these interests are going to shine through in your essay. It'll give us a sense of how you think and also give us a sense of the things that are important to you, whether those are interests or other things that you might wish to highlight in your application. JD, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. So don't try to be what you think we want, right? As I believe Nikki mentioned earlier, there's a couple of us reading your essays. And if you're applying to multiple colleges, there's a couple more, or many more admission officers reading your essays. So it's really difficult to predict what any one person wants, right? Don't write for someone else. Don't write with somebody else in mind.
So when we're thinking about the audience, of course, while JD said correctly, you shouldn't try and anticipate what we all want, but do remember who's going to be reading your essay. The people who are going to be reading your essays are admission officers, which means you want to be appropriate, first of all, right? In languages and topics. Sometimes I say, think about your grandmother again. Would your grandmother want you using that language? But also realize if you're going to be sharing information, personal information with us, this might be the type of content that's going to be discussed in an application committee environment with different admission officers. How would you feel about that information being shared? And if you're going to be sharing information that's personal, make sure it has a real reason why you're sharing it that makes it a safe place for admission officers to be able to consider when they're thinking about your application.
So don't over edit or lose your voice in the process. So I think it's a good idea to ask some people who care about you for some feedback. Maybe share the draft of your essay with your family, or maybe share it with some teachers, or maybe your counselor at your school. Ask them for some feedback on what they get out of the essay that you've just drafted. Take their suggestions into consideration as you're revising your essay, but don't take their suggestions so seriously that you end up losing the topic that is true to who you are, and that you lose your voice in that process. I think we mentioned a little while ago that we know what it sounds like to read an essay that is written by a young adult versus reading an essay who was written by a much older adult. We can tell the differences in those voices. And so just don't lose your voice in that revision process as you're continuing to work on the drafts of your essay.
Tell us a story. If you think about a couple of minutes ago, Anna and I both read a beginning part of an essay that started to tell a story. It was a compelling sentence or two that really drew us in and let us know that we were going to hear something very interesting. So tell us a story in your essay. That's a great way for us to get to know you.
But again, realize that this story is going to be focused on you. So while imagery is important, this is a personal statement from you. So it should really be reflecting something about you as opposed to just narrating the background. So tell us a story, but you're the main character. You're the protagonist. Remember that as well.
Show rather than tell. This is probably a tip that you've heard maybe in an English class. English teachers love to use this phrase of show, don't tell. So please do show us, give us details, give us descriptions, give specific examples, give specific anecdotes. Those descriptions are what will captivate us as the readers of your application more. It makes it more compelling, and we are so excited to get to learn the things that are important to you and to read these things that you've decided to highlight about yourself as you are presenting yourself and your application to an admission committee.
Don't be compelled to use a plethora of myriad words, right? It's you know, to borrow two of Anna's favorite words, I know, myriad, plethora, but you know, don't lean on that thesaurus. Use language that you're normally going to use, but also steer clear of using language that's too vague. You need to find that balance in between that. But again, we're looking for your voice here, not the voice of the thesaurus.
And so remember, while it's wonderful to draw back on life experiences, things that have happened to help formulate who the person you are now, it's really helpful to make sure at some point you relate whatever this experience is. What does it tell us about the person you are now? Because we're really trying to get to know you individually as we try and imagine if we brought you here to Hamilton, what type of a person would you be as part of our community? So make sure that whatever essay topic you're writing about, you are relating it to who you are now.
Don't be afraid to start over. So the great thing about all of you who have signed in this evening is that it is October 26th. You still have plenty of time. You still have weeks, in some cases, maybe months. For those of you who are high school seniors, as you are getting ready to submit your applications, you've given yourself plenty of time. And so it's okay to start over. If you are working on your essay and it's just not coming out of you naturally, if the language isn't flowing smoothly, if the topic doesn't seem to be working for you, feel free to scratch it. Feel free to toss that draft of your essay aside, maybe think about a different topic and completely start with a fresh page. I think sometimes looking at that blinking cursor on that blank page is sometimes the most challenging place to get started. But I think sometimes starting over really is the best strategy to take when your essay doesn't seem to be coming out of you easily or naturally, and that the language isn't flowing in a way that it sounds like it's you and your voice.
This is a really important one. Proofread, proofread, proofread. And you don't necessarily have to wait until the end of the process to proofread. In fact, you shouldn't. It's fine to proofread just a first draft or maybe even the first paragraph or two to make sure that your essay is heading the way that you want it to. And a tip that I do, especially when I write a lot of things, is I'm going to proofread a couple of different ways. I might read it on the screen first. Then maybe I'll print it out, because sometimes seeing it in a printed form rather than on the screen will make me catch something or realize something that I didn't see otherwise. And another great way, another great tool for proofreading is to just read it out loud. You don't necessarily have to read it out loud to somebody else. You can just read it out loud to the cat, read it out loud to the dog, read it out loud to the four empty walls in your bedroom. But when you read something, you're going to also get the sense of how that's going to sound in somebody's head as they are reading it on the screen or on a piece of paper. And again, it may also compel you to change something or tweak something that you might not have run into otherwise.
My cat always has really great advice on all my writing pieces, so I think that's very valuable. So, of course, as JD said, make sure that you are having enough time for revising, which means realizing if you're a person who struggles a little bit with procrastination, which I know a few of us on this call are as well people, we feel you with that struggle, it's a challenge. But realize that when we wait till the last minute, that's when things tend to go wrong. I know JD has a story about trying to write his college application essay and waiting towards the last day and having a whole computer crash situation, and very impressive scrambling on his part to be able to salvage his essay. But you don't want to put yourself in the situation where you're going to be feeling that kind of stress. He's very adamant still about it. All this time later, it was a stressful experience. So make sure that you're not waiting just to the last minute, just to the last essay. And that takes a little self-reflection. If you say, hey, I know this is something that I'm likely to do, I would sometimes write on my calendar, if my deadline is going to be January 5th, I'm going to say, nope, my deadline is January 1st. And that way I know that I'm ready to go a few days ahead of time, and then I can account for whatever life is going to throw at me. So it's that joke which says, like, life's what happens when you make God laugh at your plans or something like that, right? So it's really hard to anticipate things. Make sure you're giving yourself the space that you need, and don't procrastinate.
And finally, we are on your side. We are cheering you on. We know you all have a great essay in you, and we really enjoy reading essays. In fact, for some of us, it's our favorite part of the application, getting to hear directly from you, getting to hear that voice that is able to bring your application to life by hearing your story. So we're on your side. We are cheering you on, and hopefully we hope that some of these tips this evening have been helpful for all of you. We also wanted to bring your attention to some of our websites. So we've mentioned a couple of these already, but on the Hamilton College website, you will see some essay tips. So many of these we've already highlighted this evening, but hopefully if you take a look at these tips that are available on our website, it'll give you some more ideas as you are continuing to work on your essays. And then also we've referred to the Essays That Worked website, which is also available on the Hamilton College website. These are actually full-length excerpts of essays, examples of essays, I should say, full-length essays that we've received of enrolled Hamilton College students. So those that give you more examples of essays that we've enjoyed reading over the years. Great. So we also know that many of you may be writing some supplemental college essays. These would be essay prompts that would go beyond what is covered in the Common Application, the Coalition Application, or the QuestBridge application. So colleges and universities will sometimes give specific prompts, specific questions that they ask applicants to address and submit additional essays. These are not necessarily personal essays, but they may need a little bit of a different approach. Sometimes they ask you about your specific interest in that college and university. Make sure that you are spending as much care and effort and time in writing these responses to these essay questions as you are in that main personal essay as part of your application. Sometimes these essays are going to give a sense of your creativity. They might ask you to write about page 132 of your autobiography. They might ask you to tell us about what your favorite kind of fruit would be. If you were a fruit, what kind of fruit would you be? They're going to get a sense of how you think and your creativity. Spend some time thinking about your responses to these questions. These are not specific to Hamilton. Hamilton does not have these supplemental essays, but these are essay questions that some colleges and universities I know are asking applicants. So again, they're going to require just as much care, just as much effort in putting your responses together as writing your main personal essay. When you answer the question from those colleges and universities specifically about your interest in those colleges or universities, this is your opportunity to demonstrate what what you know about that college or university. This is your opportunity to demonstrate how you might fit with that campus community based on what you've learned about that college or university from your research in your college search. Pay attention to the prompt and make sure that you're answering the question that is asked of you in all of these supplemental essays. Anna or JD, do you have anything to add about supplemental essays?
I think it's a little bit helpful, and maybe it's obvious, but I always like to draw out the fact that supplemental essays tend to be particular for the individual institution, whereas your personal statement, your college application essay, goes to all of the colleges you're applying to. So again, when you're thinking about remembering who your audience is, for your college application essay, it should be more general, since it's going to be for all of these different admission officers at whichever colleges you are applying to. But supplements tend to go directly to the one college. So if you have the opportunity to be quite specific and answer their questions for supplements, I would encourage you to do that.
One thing I'll add here to piggyback on what Anna said is sometimes colleges have supplements that may seem quite similar. So be very careful with the copy and paste function, because I have read a few supplemental essays for Hamilton that tell me why the student was so excited that they were going to apply to, oh, let's say Middlebury. So make sure that you are focusing and personalizing that supplemental essay for the college that you are applying to.
And now we're tag teaming on that, because I agree. I think a very baseline issue with the copy paste strategy is sometimes you leave the wrong school name in. But another issue is remembering that supplemental essays tend to be opportunities for you to show that you've taken the time to get to know this institution particularly. So sometimes students will say in supplemental essays, I really am interested in this college because you have a beautiful campus and small classroom sizes and great professors. All of those things are very much true at Hamilton, but they're also probably arguably true at a couple hundred other universities around the United States. So if you're saying, oh, I'm going to save a step for myself right now, and I'm just going to copy paste and share that, you're not necessarily getting the most out of your experience and that opportunity you have with a supplemental essay. So again, if you think about the general rule, which is things that can be shared across institutions, would be through your college application essay. And then if you take the time to do a supplement essay, take the time to do it well. Take the time to make sure you're being quite specific and taking advantage of that opportunity. And maybe if you were writing something about Hamilton, reference something that would be Hamilton specific and not just our very beautiful campus and really wonderful professors with small classroom sizes.
Great. So remember, we know that you have a great essay in you. You've got this. It is great that you all have signed in this evening to learn a little bit more about the essay process, but we know that you are able to tell us your story. You've got this. We can't wait to read your essays. Feel free to visit the hamilton.edu/discover page to see the recordings of some of our previous virtual programs and any other virtual programs that we have coming up. But we wanted, before we wrap up here, we have just a few minutes left, and we are going to answer some of the questions that I know Jack Nivison has been saving from the Q&A and has forwarded to us for the live to be able to answer live. So one question we received is, I think, Anna, it would be great if you could please answer this question. And the question is, I was wondering if it's taken into account if English is not the applicant's first language.
Yes, absolutely it is. So again, one of the best parts of my job is the fact that I get to speak with students and interact with students who speak sometimes 2, 3, 4 different languages, multilingual students. Now, if you're writing an essay and it's not in your native language, we are going to take that into account. And think back to some of the advice that we've given earlier today, which says, while you need to try and give yourself space for revising and for coming back and editing your work, and you should be roughly grammatically correct, particularly if you're speaking in a non-native, if it's your second language. If you have a misplaced comma or a sentence splice, this is not going to be the reason that your essay would, this is not going to be the reason that we would not admit a student to our institution. But do realize that one of the things that we're taking into account when we're reading every single application is the overall context that you come from. So if English is not your native language, that means you speak twice as many languages as a lot of people out there. So that's quite impressive. And we are going to be reading your essay as well as any academic transcripts, and everything. Every part of your application is read as part of your overall journey. So yes, we will take it into account for sure.
Great. And And it looks like one other question we received is whether we have any general advice for how students should think about ending their personal essays.
Well,
I think-
oh, go ahead, Anna. Yeah.
I just talked, so you go ahead.
So I would say that if you think about the ending of the essay, it's the last thing that admission officer is going to read before they turn to another part of your application. So it should be something that is going to stick in our mind for a little while. Think about those openings, for example, that Anna and I read, right? Something that is equally compelling is often sometimes helpful. And I think it was Nikki who said earlier, right? This is not like a paper for an English class where you have to have your subject and you have to have, right, your supporting statement. So it's not like you need a conclusion. That's not necessarily what we're looking for here, but just something that is going to be memorable as we kind of close out reading about you.
I'm going to add a little bit on that. If you're looking for a way to end a set, I think, as Nikki said, sometimes the hardest thing is when you look at the blank page, but also I think sometimes the hardest thing is you have a lot of words and now how do I end this? So one of the things that I would encourage you to think about is, again, is that idea that we're drawing it back to who you are now as a person, right? So whatever the topic is, it's coming back to who you are now as a person. So how do you do that? I encourage you to think, well, JD's right. We don't have to have a specific this structure, this structure, this structure. I am going to be a little bit different and say summaries versus conclusions. And this is also part of what makes admission officers a little bit different. As I said, don't try and please us, write something that's important to you. But what I always like to encourage students to do is to think about what are the ideas they're sharing in their essay and how do they finish their essay with a conclusion that comes back to who I am right now or who you are as a student versus summarizing. And if you're still like, what does that really mean? You can think about it this way. So let's imagine for a moment that your essay has different structures represented by a letter, right? So A, B, C, right? Would be the major idea, the three major portions of your essay. So you could either end it by saying A, B, C, and so ABC, right? Which is kind of like a summary of the idea. Or you could say A, B, C, and so D, which tells you about how has it come back to me and how have I grown through this experience. So if possible, try and think about the ending of your essay. Are you drawing it back to who you are now? So again, JD says no conclusion, I'm saying conclusion, sorry. But summary versus conclusion. And I would say conclusions tend to be stronger because they tend to tell us more about you right now. And that's really what the goal for the essay is.
Great. So it doesn't look like we have any other live questions to be addressed here this evening, and we are just about out of time. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in this evening. Thank you to Jack, who's been behind the scenes responding to some questions in the Q&A for us. And thank you again to everyone. Again, we know that you are going to have a great essay. It's great that you've all joined us today. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully some of these tips are helping to guide you as you continue to work on your college essays. But good luck to all of you as you are working on those essays. Good luck as you're moving forward with your college search process. And please don't hesitate to be in touch with any of us here in the Hamilton Admission Office as you're moving forward with your college search process if you have any questions along the way. But thanks again, and good luck to all of you.